Imagine the sting of icy ocean waves crashing over your body at dawn, every muscle screaming for mercy, as the world's toughest warriors laugh at the one thing that keeps your soul alive. That's where Sarah found herself, a lone woman in a sea of hardened Navy SEAL trainees, her skin marked by a tattoo that drew cruel mockery from those who should have been her brothers. But in that frozen moment of humiliation, a secret was about to unfold that would silence them all, revealing a depth of sacrifice and love that no boot camp drill could ever prepare them for. Sarah's boots sank into the wet sand of Coronado Beach, the California sun barely peeking over the horizon as the first brutal day of BUDS training began. The air was thick with salt, and the sharp temps of sweat mingled with the distant roar of the Pacific that seemed to mock their every step. She was 28, with a lean frame forged from years of quiet determination, her dark hair tied back in a nonsense ponytail that did little to hide the fire in her green eyes. Around her, the other trainees, mostly men, built like tanks, their faces etched with the arrogance of those who'd never truly been tested, jostled and joked, their voices booming like thunder. But Sarah carried something they didn't: a small tattoo on her left forearm, a delicate anchor intertwined with a faded ribbon, the ink slightly blurred from time and tears. It wasn't flashy, not like the tribal designs or skull motifs sported by her peers, but to her, it was everything: a silent vow etched into her skin, as the instructor barked orders for the first surf torture session, plunging them into the freezing waves. Sarah felt the familiar pull of doubt, wondering if she'd ever prove she belonged here. Yet deep down, she knew this tattoo held the key to her unbreakable spirit, and soon, it would turn the tide in ways no one could foresee. The laughter started during the log PT drill, when the team hoisted massive telephone poles onto their shoulders, grunting under the weight as sand burned their feet and the sun beat down like a relentless hammer. Sarah's arms trembled but held firm, her mind drifting to the man who'd inspired that tattoo: her father, a Navy veteran whose stories of valor had been her bedtime tales. One trainee, a burly guy named Ramirez with a smirk that could curdle milk, caught sight of it as they switched positions. "Hey princess, what's with the girly anchor? You think that's gonna hold you down when the real pain hits?" His words sliced through the air, drawing chuckles from the others, their eyes flicking to her arm like it was a joke. Sarah's cheeks burned, not from the exertion, but from the raw vulnerability exposed. That tattoo wasn't just ink, it was a piece of her heart, inked the day after her dad's funeral, a promise to carry on his legacy. She bit her lip, pushing harder, the pole digging into her shoulder like a reminder of every doubt she'd ever swallowed. But as the drill sergeant circled, his gaze lingering on her for a split second longer than usual, Sarah wondered if this mockery was just the beginning of a revelation that would leave them all speechless. Hell Week descended like a storm. 5.5 days of non-stop torment where sleep was a myth and quitting was a whisper away. Sarah's body ached in places she didn't know existed. Her hands blistered from rope climbs, her lungs burning from endless swims in the hypothermic surf. The tattoo, now chafed and red from the constant friction of her wetsuit, became the focal point of their jabs during rare moments of respite huddled around Mr. Ease in the dim light of the barracks, voices low but cutting. "Look at that thing," muttered Jenkins, a lanky recruit with a chip on his shoulder. "Probably got it at a mall kiosk to feel tough." The group erupted in tired laughter, their exhaustion fueling the cruelty, as if belittling her made their own suffering bearable. Sarah sat silently, tracing the anchor with her finger, remembering how her father had clutched a similar ribbon in his final days, battling cancer that no metal could defeat. It was his last gift to her, her faded Navy ribbon from his service, tied around the anchor he'd sketched on a napkin, symbolizing the strength that held families together through wars unseen. As the bell rang for the next evolution, Sarah stood taller, her resolve hardening like steel, knowing that this symbol of loss would soon become a beacon of respect none of them could ignore. The turning point came during the infamous boat crew races, where teams paddled inflatable zodiacs through pounding waves, the ocean a living beast trying to swallow them whole. Sarah's crew lagged, her arms pulling with everything she had, water spraying like needles against her face. Ramirez, in the boat ahead, yelled back, "That tattoo ain't saving you now, sweetheart." The words echoed over the crash of surf, stinging worse than the salt in her eyes. But then, a rogue wave flipped their boat, dumping them into the water closing over her head, the taste of brine filling her mouth as panic clawed at her chest. She surfaced, gasping, and saw her teammates floundering. Without hesitation, she dove back in, grabbing Jenkins by the collar and hauling him toward the overturned hull. Her tattoo flashed in the sunlight as she worked, a silent testament to the sacrifices she'd already made. As they regrouped on the beach, shivering and defeated, the commander, a grizzled veteran named Captain Harlan, with eyes like weathered steel, approached, his boots crunching the sand ominously. What he was about to say would shatter their assumptions and forge an unbreakable bond. Captain Harlan's voice cut through the wind like a knife, commanding silence from the exhausted group as they stood at attention, water dripping from their fatigues like tears. "Unshed Trainee Thompson," he barked, his gaze locking on Sarah, front and center. Her heart pounded, a drumbeat of fear and defiance. As she stepped forward, the tattoo on her arm now fully exposed under the harsh afternoon light. The others exchanged glances, smirks fading into curiosity. What had she done to earn this spotlight? Harlan's face, usually a mask of stone, softened imperceptibly as he studied the ink, the anchor and ribbon that told a story deeper than any war zone. "This tattoo," he said, his tone shifting from command to something almost reverent. "I've seen one like it before." Sarah's breath caught, memories flooding back, her father in his hospital bed, whispering tales of a mission gone wrong, where Harlan, then a young lieutenant, had been saved by her dad's quick thinking under enemy fire. The ribbon was from that very OP, a symbol of the debt owed. As Harlan raised his hand in a crisp salute, the group froze, their laughter dying in their throats like a flame snuffed out, realizing this woman carried the legacy of a hero they'd only read about in reports. The revelation hung in the air like fog over the bay, thick and unyielding, as Harlan lowered his hand and began to speak, his voice carrying the weight of decades in uniform. "Your father, Chief Thompson, pulled me from a burning helo in Nam, 72. That ribbon, it's from the medal he earned that Dare refused to leave me behind, even with shrapnel in his leg." Sarah's eyes welled, the salt of tears mixing with the ocean's residue on her cheeks, as images flashed, her dad's scarred leg, the stories he'd downplayed with a wink, the way he'd tied that ribbon around her wrist on her 18th birthday, saying, "Anchors hold through storms, kid." The trainees shifted, uncomfortably, Ramirez's face, paling as guilt washed over him like the tide. Jenkins stared at his boots, the mockery now a bitter pill. Harlan continued, "He never bragged, but that man was the reason I made it home to my family. And now, his daughter stands here, enduring what breaks most men." Sarah nodded, her voice steady despite the tremor in her soul. "He taught me to never quit, sir." As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows on the sand, the group realized this wasn't just training, it was a collision of past and present, and Sarah's tattoo was the bridge that demanded their respect. From that moment, the dynamic shifted like the wind changing direction before a squall, the laughter replaced by a quiet awe that permeated every drill and debrief. Sarah felt the change in the air, subtle at first, a nod from Ramirez during chow, Jenkins offering her a spot in the huddle during cold water immersion. But the true test came during the land navigation evolution, trekking through the rugged hills under a moonless sky, compasses in hand and packs weighing like guilt on their backs. Lost in the darkness, her team argued, voices rising with frustration, the scent of pine and earth grounding her as doubt crept in. "We should have listened to her earlier," muttered one, referring to Sarah's suggestion on the route, her instincts honed from her father's old maps spread across the kitchen table. She pushed forward, the tattoo a talisman against the fatigue, leading them to the checkpoint just as dawn broke, golden light filtering through the trees like a promise kept. As they collapsed in relief, Harlan's words echoed in her mind, fueling a fire that no exhaustion could extinguish. But the real emotional storm was yet to brew in the weeks ahead. Weeks blurred into a haze of push-ups, on knuckles raw from the sand, swims that left lungs searing, and obstacle courses that tested the very fabric of one's will. Sarah's tattoo, once a target, now became a symbol whispered about in the barracks. "Thompson's kid," they'd say, with a mix of envy and admiration. But tensions simmered beneath the surface, especially with Ramirez, whose pride smarted like an open wound. He'd corner her during a rare break, his voice low. "I didn't know. Okay. About your old man." Sarah met his gaze, seeing the vulnerability behind the bravado, the way his own scarce emotional ones from a fractured home mirrored hers. "It's not about knowing," she replied softly, the evening breeze carrying the scent of eucalyptus It's about pushing through for something bigger than yourself. Their conversation lingered like smoke from a distant fire, forging an unlikely alliance as they prepped for the dive phase, where underwater demons awaited. Little did they know, a life-or-death moment loomed that would bind them forever in the depths. The pool competency test was a nightmare clad in chlorine, the water a crystal-clear trap where trainees simulated combat dives. Weighted down with gear that pulled like invisible hands toward the abyss, Sarah descended, bubbles trailing her like forgotten dreams, the pressure building in her ears as she navigated the underwater maze. Then disaster struck. Jenkins' regulator malfunctioned, his eyes wide with panic through the mask, flailing in the dim blue light. Without thinking, Sarah shared her air, buddy breathing as her father had taught her in backyard pools, the tattoo on her arm brushing his as she steadied him. Up top, the team watched in hushed tension, Ramirez's fists clenched, remembering his own near drownings in life. They surfaced gasping, Jenkins coughing water, his gratitude spilling out like the droplets from his hair. "You saved me, Thompson, just like your dad would have." The moment crystallized their bond, a deep human connection born from shared peril. But as Harlan observed from the deck, saluting silently once more, Sarah felt the weight of legacy pressing harder, wondering if she could carry it without breaking. As graduation approached, the emotional undercurrents swelled like the tide before a full moon, each trainee reflecting on the journey that had stripped them bare. Sarah sat alone on the beach one evening, the waves lapping gently now, a far cry from the monsters they'd battled. Tracing her tattoo, she whispered to the stars, "I did it, Dad, for you." Memories flooded, his laughter during fishing trips, the way he'd salute her playfully after little victories, the hospital room where he'd squeezed her hand, saying, "Be the anchor, Sarah." Tears fell freely, mixing with the sand, as Ramirez approached, sitting beside her without a word at first. "My pops left when I was a kid," he confessed, voice rough like gravel. "Never had a hero like yours." Their shared silence spoke volumes, a sacrifice of vulnerability that healed old wounds, paving the way for unbreakable camaraderie. But the final ceremony held one last surprise that would etch this story into their hearts eternally. The graduation day dawned crisp and clear, the parade ground alive with families in the stands, flags snapping in the breeze like applause withheld. Sarah stood in formation, her uniform starched, the tattoo hidden but pulsing with pride beneath her sleeve. Harlan took the podium, his voice booming over the speakers, recounting tales of grit, but then he paused, eyes on Sarah. "And then there's Trainee Thompson," he said, emotion cracking his command, "daughter of a man who saved my life. Today, I salute not just her, but the legacy she carries." He raised his hand, the entire platoon following suit in a wave of respect, freezing the moment in time as cameras flashed and hearts swelled. Ramirez and Jenkins exchanged glances, their own eyes misty, realizing the laughter had been ignorance, now replaced by profound connection. Sarah returned the salute, her voice steady in the oath, but inside, a bittersweet warmth bloomed, heartwarming in victory, yet tinged with the ache of absence. In the aftermath, as medals were pinned and hugs exchanged, Sarah felt her father's presence in the wind, a gentle push forward. The team gathered one last time, toasting with water bottles under the setting sun, stories flowing like the ocean they'd conquered. "That tattoo," Ramirez said with a grin, "it's our anchor now." Laughter rang true this time, bonded by sacrifice and understanding, a family forged in fire. Sarah smiled, knowing she'd not only honored her dad but inspired a new generation. Her journey, a testament to the power of hidden strength, and as the stars emerged, she whispered a final promise, ensuring the story would ripple on, pulling others into its emotional depths. But wait, there's more to this tale that tugs at the heartstrings even deeper, a hidden layer of sacrifice that Sarah kept buried until that very night. Years before, Sarah's life had been a quiet storm in a small Virginia town, where the scent of pine from the nearby woods mingled with the aroma of her mother's homemade apple pie cooling on the windowsill. Her father, Chief Thompson, retired from the Navy with honors, but carrying invisible scars from battles long past, would sit on the porch swing, his calloused hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee, staring at the horizon as if waiting for a ship that never came. Sarah, just a teenager then, would curl up beside him, her head on his shoulder, listening to tales of camaraderie and courage that painted pictures more vivid than any movie. "The sea takes, but it also gives," he'd say, his voice gravelly from years of shouting orders, the ribbon from his medal tucked in his pocket like a secret. But cancer crept in like a thief, stealing his strength day by day. The hospital room, filled with the beep of machines and the sterile smell of antiseptic that Sarah grew to hate. In those final weeks, as he weakened, he sketched the anchor on a napkin with trembling hands, tying the faded ribbon around it. "This is for you, kid. Be the anchor for others when I'm gone." His words hung heavy, a vow she inked into her skin the day after his funeral, tears blurring the artist's lines, a permanent reminder of love lost too soon. Yet as she packed for SEAL training, that tattoo became her armor, but the mockery ahead would test if it was strong enough to hold. Arriving at Coronado, the base buzzed with energy. Helicopters worry overhead like giant birds of prey, the air alive with the shouts of instructors molding recruits into warriors. Sarah's first night in the barracks was a symphony of snores and whispers, her bunk hard and unforgiving, the tattoo itching under the blanket as nerves kept sleep at bay. She thought of her mother back home, alone now, sending care packages with notes that read, "Your dad would be proud." The emotional weight pressed down, a mix of grief and grit fueling her dawn runs along the beach, feet pounding the sand in rhythm with her heartbeat. But when the laughter erupted over her tattoo during that initial inspection, lines of trainees standing rigid as the instructor paced, it felt like a betrayal of everything sacred. "Cute doodle," sneered one, the words echoing in the sterile room smelling of polish and sweat. Sarah's jaw clenched, vivid memories of her father's salute at her high school graduation flashing like lightning, urging her to push on, and push she did. But the true test of her emotional fortitude was brewing in the shadows of doubt. During the surf passage, where boats battled waves like gladiators in an arena, Sarah's resolve cracked just a hair. The water was a frigid embrace, numbing limbs and clouding minds, her team cursing the spray that stung like bees. As they capsized again, laughter from rival crews carried over the foam, targeting her once more, tattoos probably washing off. But in the chaos, she spotted a trainee from another boat struggling, his head bobbing dangerously low. Abandoning protocol, she swam to him, her arms cutting through the water with the strength of generations, pulling him to safety as the current tugged like desperate hands. On shore, gasping, he thanked her, his eyes wide with the fear of what could have been. Harlan watched from afar, noting the act, a spark of recognition igniting. Sarah's tattoo, wet and glistening, seemed to glow with purpose. But the night brought dreams of her father, whispering encouragements that blurred the line between memory and motivation, drawing her deeper into the emotional vortex.